Hey guys, today I'm making a quick video on the new 5.0 compositor presets. I am using the 5.0 beta, which means that there's a good chance some of this will change before the final release, so if things are a little different when you look at it later, that's probably why. I've got a really simple setup here. It's just a cube that's beveled with a simple background and a couple lights, and that's it. So let's go ahead and hop straight into the first one, which is the Chromatic aberration node. What this node does is very similar to the old lens distortion node. It's very similar to the dispersion specifically on this node, but it's got a bunch of extra options as well. The first one is called scale, and essentially what this does, it splits the image into colors and then offsets each of those color channels by scale. So essentially it makes them larger each time it duplicates. As you can see, it kind of centers out from the center of the image, and it kind of steps outward in these very uniform steps going outward from the center. Offset offsets it in a specific either vertical or horizontal direction, again doing the same thing where it basically duplicates the image, shifts it to a color, and then overlays it on top. Directional blur essentially blurs it from a single point outward to the rest of the image, and then you can choose where the center of that blur is via the 0.5. Let's also switch it from CPU to GPU so it's faster. The first slider goes from side to side, and the second slider goes up and down. So as you can see, it kind of goes away from wherever you center it. For 0.51, it is centered side to side, and at the very top of the image, kind of going downward. The last option is lens dispersion, and that's pretty much exactly what you get in the lens distortion node. In fact, if we connect both, you can kind of see as we switch between them, they'll look pretty much exactly the same. The next node we're going to look at is the film grain node. This one only works currently, this may change if you use a later version, but currently it only works in CPU render. So what this does is it has a Voronoi pattern noise that it, I believe, multiplies. In fact, something to note is if you double click on any of these pre-made setups, you can see exactly what they're made up of and what nodes create them. So for this, it's got some math, and then it uses a bunch of layers of this Voronoi grain, which itself is based on Voronoi textures. We can also actually, if we look at it, we can see that it uses overlays. So this essentially creates a film grain and overlays it on top. Is a super simplified version of what it does. Now, for the controls, color does color jittering, which each of the little specs, because if we turn up the size to something large like 20, we can see a little bit better exactly what it's doing. So as you can see, it's made up of a bunch of these little circular cells that get larger and smaller with the grain size. Color, each one kind of has a color that's sort of randomized, and monochrome, it keeps them all grayscale. So if you don't want it to shift your colors at all, you want to set it to monochrome, and if you do like that kind of color jitter look, then you can switch it to color. Factor simply controls the strength, so higher factor will be stronger, and lower factor will be fainter. If you're using this in your renders, I would recommend keeping the grain size pretty small, probably below 5, and then the factor you want to keep pretty low as well, like probably maybe no more than 0.2 or 0.5 at the most. Lastly, there's an animated checkbox. What this does is it takes each frame that this exists and completely randomizes it. So if you don't have animated checked, then the film grain will be the same throughout, and if you do check it, then it will be different every frame. Next, we have sensor noise. This kind of replicates the noise you get on a digital camera. The luminance noise is a grayscale noise that will simply affect the value of each pixel, and the chroma noise will shift the color of each pixel. Something to note is the chroma noise will only appear if you have colors. If your image is grayscale, the chroma noise won't do anything. And animated is exactly the same as it is on the film grain, where it will change it each frame it's activated. The next node, and in my opinion probably one of the more useful out of the set of nodes, is the vignette node. Now what this does, we need to zoom out so we can see the whole image, is it darkens the outside edge of the image. The factor, once again, controls its strength, and feather controls how blurred it is. So if you turn it all the way down, you can see it's a very sharp line, and if you turn it up, it smooths it and feathers it out. If we click this little down arrow, we get transform options. So the first one, let's turn down the feather so we can see what's happening. The corner rounds out the corners, so if you turn it down, you get square corners, and if you turn it up, you get rounded corners. The scale options will change how tall and wide it is. So if you turn up the first one, it makes it wider, and if you adjust the second one, it makes it taller. And you can use this to kind of customize the overall shape of it, or even if you want, if you turn it the first one all the way up, turn the feather down, turn the second option lower, as well as the factor all the way up, you kind of get letterboxing. So if that's something you want, this is probably the node to use to get it. Finally, the offset will actually move the entire vignette around. So the X goes side to side, and the Y moves it vertically. And then the last option, angle, will twist it. So you'll basically spin the entire thing, and you can use that to kind of get funkier effects. The next node is called Sepia, and it basically tints the image sepia tone with some adjustments. So the contrast will simply just turn up the overall contrast of the image. Tone will shift the exact color that it tints it with. So toward 0 will be red, toward 1 will be green, and in the middle you get pretty much a perfect orange, and then you can kind of lightly adjust it one way or the other. And finally, the saturation will turn the overall saturation and kind of the effectiveness of the node up further. The next node is called split toning. What this does is it tints your highlights and it tints your shadows. So you can use it to tint your highlights one color and your shadows another color. And it works, in my opinion, okay. I think it'd be a little tricky to get to look really good in an actual render though. But if we kind of just play with it, you can see that the first option is the color we're tinting the highlights. The first slider is how strong of an effect that tint has. The second option is what color we're tinting the shadows. And again, how strong that effect is. Lastly, if we click the little down arrow on the transition, the balance is basically a threshold for what counts as a highlight color and what counts as a shadow color. So as you turn it up, it'll count everything as a shadow color, and as you turn it down, it'll count every color as a highlight color. Lastly, the smoothness simply adjusts the fall off between the two. So all the way at 0, it is a perfectly harsh line between the two colors, and at max, it's a very soft blurred line. The tune image node is essentially a whole bunch of slightly different ways of sharpening an image. The contrast, adjust the contrast of the image. Color boost essentially turns up the saturation of your existing colors. And now this color boost is affected by preserve colors, which will try and maintain the original colors of your image. So if you turn this off, you'll see it shifts the colors much further than if we have it on. The last three options are all sort of different methods of sharpening your image, so they'll all be a little bit similar, but with slightly different effects. Clarity will kind of boost the shadows of your image along the edges to try and make it look a little sharper. The detail slider will basically raise contrast right along your edges, so it basically runs an edge detection algorithm, and then it uses that to kind of determine which way it should shift what colors. So you can see right along the bottom line here, it brightens it on the upside, and it kinda darkens the dark part, and then it leaves the other side mostly alone, maybe even darkens the dark side a little bit. So it just bumps the contrast right on your edges. The sharpness does a very similar thing, but it usually is much more of a grainy and aggressive effect. So all of these, you want to be really careful with how strongly you use them, because they can very quickly kind of just destroy your image. And as you can kind of see with this one, it does a very similar thing, but it does it basically down to a pixel, so it gets very crunchy very quickly. The last node we're going to look at is called Unsharp Mask. The Unsharp Mask node is essentially an edge detect node. It has three simple options. The first is radius. It determines how thick of a line it places on your edges. The factor determines how aggressively it places those lines. The threshold is basically how sharp of a line does it have to be before it gets detected. So as you can see at 0, even these really subtle shadows get caught and kind of accentuated. But if we turn the threshold all the way up to 1, it basically only catches the really high contrast edges along the edge of our cube. This concludes all of the image adjustment groups they have added in Blender 5.0, and I look forward to seeing which ones they add in the future, because at least a few of these I can see being really helpful, as they do things I've already done in other ways, but they're a lot quicker and in sometimes a lot easier to adjust. So I hope that was helpful for some of you, and I will see you next time. If you want to help support what I do here, I have a thanks page on which I sell a bunch of minis and models for either Warhammer or painting or D&D or whatever you want to use them for. So if that interests you, go ahead and check them out.